Good afternoon and welcome back to Stories with Don, reading Robin Hood. And today we are on chapter 12 and it is entitled Robin Hood meets Green. Let me try that again. Robin Hood meets George a Green and then a beggar man. One day Robin Hood, Will Scarlet, and Little John were out along the highway. They had gone beyond the forest and were in the open country when they heard a merry voice singing. They stood still to listen and heard these words. There is neither knight nor squire, said the Pinder, nor baron that is so bold, nor baron that is so bold. Dare make a trespass to the town of Wakefield, but his pledge goes to the pinfold. The three outlaws went a little farther along the way, and they saw a stout, jolly-looking fellow seated on the ground, with his back against a thorn, caroling like a blackbird. I know him, said Little John. 'Tis George a Green, the Pinder of Wakefield. A Pinder was a man who kept the pinfold, or pound, and it was his duty to lock up all stray beasts. He seems a merry fellow, said Robin Hood, but he is not the sort we seek. We will go this way, and he turned aside from the road. But they had not made a dozen steps when the Pinder ceased his song and shouted to them to halt. Turn back, said the Pinder. You have forsaken the king's highway and made a path through the corn. Here's a bold fellow, said Robin Hood quietly to his followers. We are three, and he is one, yet he commands us not to leave the highway. I believe he is as stout a blade as can be found in the north country, quoth Little John. He hath fought many a good wager with sword and buckler, to my knowledge. We will try him, said Robin. I love a bold heart, and will add him to our band if his mettle rings true. How will you try him, master? Said Will Scarlet. By Our Lady, a sharp trial will I devise, replied Robin Hood. We will all three rush upon him as if in anger at his bold challenge, and if he stands against such odds, he is a man worth having. Now, roared the Pinder at this moment, do not stand stalking there among yourselves, but get out of the corn and back to the highway. What? Shouted Robin. Dost thou think, rude varlet, that we will submit to be ordered about by thee? By Our Lady, we will crop thy ears from thy head. And he drew his sword and made a rush at the Pinder, and Little John and Scarlet followed, waving their bright bands above their heads and shouting, Aye, master, crop the knave's ears with your hunting knife. The Pinder turned and made one tremendous leap, but it was not in flight. It was to gain a broad old thorn tree, and here he set his back against the tree and his foot against a stone. Out flashed his sword, up swung his buckler, and he was ready for his assailants. They dashed upon him, and their swords clattered on his buckler, for as swiftly as they struck at him, he caught the blows with wonderful deftness on his shield of steel. Nor did he fail to get in such swinging cuts in return that the outlaws came very near to being paid back in their own coin. It was not long before Robin Hood was satisfied that George a Green was indeed a stout man. Hold thy hand, cried Robin Hood, and my men will do the same. Verily, this is one of the best Pinders I ever tested by the sword. So the contest came to a pause, and the Pinder was glad to have a chance to fetch a few breaths and lean on his sword. Nevertheless, he kept a wary eye on the three outlaws, and was ready at any instant to take to blade and buckler again. Come, said Robin Hood, you are a man after my own heart, Pinder. Will you follow me? Whither? Cried the Pinder. To the merry greenwood, replied Robin, where my lusty fellows chase the deer through the forest glades and live a life of jolly freedom. And who are you? Cried the Pinder. I am Robin Hood, said the outlaw. The Pinder thrust his sword into the scabbard, flung aside his buckler, stepped forward, and put his hand into Robin's. I am your man, he said at once. I have wished for many a day to meet you, and I love a wild, free life. Enroll me in your band." "I will, good fellow," cried Robin Hood gladly, "and these shall be your companions. They are Little John and Will Scarlet." "Aye, Little John, I thought it was you," said the Pinder, taking the giant's hand. "I have seen you in Wakefield in the old days before you took to the greenwood." Little John and Will Scarlet shook hands with their new comrade, and then all four sat down under the thorn and ate from a bag of food with which the Pinder was provided. When the bread and beef and ale had been dispatched, Robin Hood said to his three followers, "Stay you here and watch the road. I shall walk a little farther, and if I meet with no adventure, I shall be back anon." "And if we meet with no adventure, master," said Little John, "what then?" "Oh, you may follow me," said Robin Hood. So the three men remained chatting under the thorn, and Robin went on his way along the road. Within 2 miles, the road he was following ran into another, and at the meeting of the ways, Robin stood for a good while. At length he saw a beggar come marching with long, even stride. The beggar was coming toward Robin, and the latter stood and watched him. "By my faith," thought the outlaw, "yonder fellow goes with sturdy step, and he has a stiff, heavy crabstick in his hand. I have heard that a strong rogue such as yon will often pick up valuable things, and that a dirty bag may often have a load worth lightning. I will have a few words with him." So Robin Hood placed himself in the path and waited for the beggar. The latter had seen the outlaw, but he came on with the same long, even stride, neither faster nor slower. The nearer he got, the plainer it was to be seen that he might prove to be a very awkward customer to tackle. His rags flew in the wind, and through the rents his brown arms and legs showed thick and muscular. His ragged cloak was patched in every color of the rainbow, and on his head were 3 old hats jammed down one on top of the other. Round his neck hung a great bag, buckled to a stout strap of leather. "Tarry, my friend," said Robin, "tarry and speak with me." The beggar made no sign that he had heard a word, and pushed straight ahead without slackening his stride. Then Robin sprang straight in front of the beggar and said, "Nay, but tarry thou must." "By my troth," said the beggar, "but I have no fancy to obey you. Let me tell you that I have far to go today, and I have no mind to reach my lodging-house late. For then, look you, the supper would all be eaten, and I should look wondrous foolish to be there late for the last meal." "All very fine," said Robin. "You are very careful about your own supper, but what of mine? Come, lend me some money, and I'll betake myself at once to the nearest tavern." "Money?" cried the beggar. "I've no money to lend, and if I had, not a penny would I lend to you. You are as young a man as I am, and just as active. Be off with you, and get money for yourself. If you wait to buy bread with aught I lend you, you'll eat nothing this 12-month, that I'll warrant you." Robin's temper rose, and he spoke out sharply. "Now, by my faith, thou art a saucy rogue. Down with your wallet, beggarman, and let me see what it may contain. Loose the strings, or I'll tear the bag open with my own hand. If thou hast but a small farthing, I'll see it ere I go." "It takes 2 to make a bargain," jeered the beggar. How if I will not obey you?" "Well then," cried Robin, "if thou darest to make any din, I will try if the head of a broadsword may not pierce a beggar's skin." "Fare better let me be," said the beggar with a grim smile. "I care not a rap for thy bow and broad arrow. You'll get nothing but ill from me, I warn you." Robin was now so angry that he swung up his bow and set a broad arrow on the string. But quick as he was, the beggar was quicker. The latter fetched so swift and heavy a stroke with his great pike staff that bow and broad arrow and flinders flew about. Seeing that his bow and arrow were useless, Robin clapped his hand on his sword hilt. Down whistled the pike staff again and dropped across Robin's knuckles so that his hand was numbed, and he could not draw his blade. Then a third tremendous blow came the giant crabstick crashed on Robin's head and laid him flat on the ground. The doughty beggar leaned on his staff and now began to laugh and jeer at poor Robin. Here's a picture of their meeting with Robin on the ground. "Stand up, man," he chuckled. "'Tis early yet to go to rest. Get up and count the money you have taken from me, and then you may go to the tavern and have a merry bout with your friends, drinking wine and ale at the beggar's expense. Get up, I say." But Robin Hood had had too shrewd a crack on the head to get up in a hurry, and after crowing over his fallen enemy again, the beggar marched on his way. Scarce 5 minutes later, Little John, Will Scarlet, and Georgia Green, the jolly Pinder, came along the road. They had met no adventure, and so were seeking their master. When they saw him lying at full length on the road, they began to run as fast as they could, and soon were at his side. "What's wrong, master?" cried Little John. "What's wrong? Your bow and arrow and even your head are broken. How comes this about?" "Marry, my good lads," replied Robin Hood, sitting up, "I have met with a beggar who can wield his pike-staff in such fashion that there be few to match him." And he told the story of the encounter. "Gramercy," cried Little John, "no beggar shall so evilly use my master and escape with a whole skin. You, Will Scarlet, stop by our leader while Georgia Green and I follow up this scurvy rogue and deal with him." So it was arranged, and Will Scarlet began to bind up Robin's head, while Little John and the Pinder ran after the beggar. "Take care of his pike-staff," called Robin after them, but Little John replied, "You shall soon see that his staff will stand him in poor stead. He shall be bound and led back to see if ye shall have him slain or hanged on a tree." "I know a sure way of having him," said Little John to Georgia Green as they hurried along. "There is a short cut through a wood near at hand, which is nearer by 3 miles than following the highway." So the two men went through the wood and ran up hill and down dale in their eagerness to get in front of the man who had given their master such a beating. At last they came to a little wood in a glen, and through this wood the highway ran. Little John stooped down and looked in the dust at the road. "There is no new footmark of man or beast," said he, "so the beggar has not yet passed." "We have him," said Georgia Green, "and we will make his hide pay for what he has done this day." At one point of the way the road was narrow and ran between 2 great oaks. The 2 companions hid themselves, one behind each oak, and waited for their prey. Presently the beggar came marching along, his step neither faster nor slower than his usual pace, and whistling softly as if he had naught to fear from anyone. But as he strode between the oaks, Little John and George were upon him at a bound. Little John mastered his formidable staff, and Georgia Green whipped out a dagger and held it at his breast. "False rascal," cried George, "give up your staff, or this dagger will be thy portion." The beggar loosed his staff, and Little John took it and stuck it in the turf by its iron-shod point. "Grant me my life," cried the beggar, finding himself helpless in the grip of these 2 powerful men. "Hold away that ugly knife, or I shall die of fear. What harm have I ever done to you that you should slay me?" "Harm?" cried Little John. "Harm enough, thou ragged rogue. Thou hast come near to slaying the gentlest man and best master that ever was born. So thou shalt be led back fast bound to see if he will have thee slain with a dagger or hanged by a tree." But the beggar continued to plead for his life. "Brave gentlemen," he said, "what good will it do to you to take a poor beggar's life? Let me go, and I will give you the 100 pounds and some odd silver which is hidden at the bottom of my bag. It is the savings of many years, but 'tis better for a man to part with his money than his life." "Hearken to the rogue," cried Georgia Green. "He hath 100 pound and more in his beggar's bag. Well, never judge a man by his looks, says I." "'Tis no surprise to me," said Little John, for I have often known a ragged cloak to cover riches in these unsafe days. But come, man, turn out thy store and let us see this money." "Gladly will I do that," cried the beggar, and unstrapped his great leathern wallet and let it down on the ground with care as though it was very heavy. Now there was a strong wind blowing through the glen, a breeze which flapped the beggar's rags about him, and he turned his back to it as if to avoid the keen blast. Little John and Georgia Green were facing their prisoner, eager to see what was in the bag and watching his every movement as he unfastened the straps from his buckles. The beggar plunged both hands into the great wallet and raised them, but they were not filled with money but meal, which he dashed right into the faces of the waiting outlaws. In an instant, Little John and George were blind and gasping. The fine meal filled their eyes, noses, and mouths, till they could neither see nor breathe. The strong wind helped the beggar and raised a blinding whirl of meal in which all sight of the cunning fellow was lost. Handful upon handful of the meal the beggar hurled upon them, and finished by shaking his great bag in their faces. The two outlaws tried to shout in their rage, but the meal choked them, and they could only sputter and gasp. They drove their knuckles into their eyes to clear the fine particles away, but that only made matters worse, for the more they rubbed, the blinder they became. Then the beggar made one jump and seized his great pike-staff, which stood where Little John had placed it. "How now, my masters," he shouted. "It seems I have done ye wrong in mealing your clothes. The least I can do is to dust your jackets for you." And with that he began to lay on them fast and heavy with his big stick. Whack, thump, bang! Down came the great stick across the shoulders of the outlaws, and the meal rose again in clouds under the swinging blows. Little John and George groped hither and thither, trying to seize the beggar, but he dodged them easily and hit them again and again, where and how he liked, his staff falling on their heads and backs as a flail falls on a sheaf. At last there was nothing for it but flight, and the outlaws hurried away down the glen, blinded and smarting. "Why this hurry?" cried the beggar, following them as they stumbled over the roots and fallen branches. "Tarry a little, you are not paid in full yet. Do not fear that I shall prove cheap." But the outlaws had had enough of the coin with which the beggar paid his debts, and they fled faster still. "Well, if you must go," cried the cunning rogue, "here's one for luck." And he gave each of the outlaws a last tremendous buffet, turned back, and went on his way merrily. When Little John and Georgia Green found that they were really free of this terrible beggar, they stopped at a spring and washed the meal from their eyes. But when at last they could see, there was no sign of their assailant. He had taken to the woods and vanished completely. So there was nothing for them to do but to return to their master and Will Scarlet. "Why," said Robin Hood, "how is this? Ye went after a beggar, but I think ye have been at the mill, for your clothes are full of meal." Little John grinned, for though he had come off with the worst end of the stick, he could see the fun of the thing. "We seized the beggar, sure enough, master," said he, and he offered to ransom himself from his great bag, and he went on to tell the story of the meal and the big pike-staff. Robin Hood and Will Scarlet could not help laughing at this droll story, and Will Scarlet laughed loudest of all, for he had never felt the beggar's stick. "Well, the beggar is the best man this time," said Robin, who could respect a bold foeman. "We must go back to the forest with naught but bruises to show for our gains this day, and by Our Lady, I think he hath banged you two worse than he banged me." "And I shall be sore for a week," grumbled Little John. "And I am black and blue all over," said Georgia Green. "I think we had better say naught about this matter," said Robin Hood, "or we shall be shamed forevermore, thus to be overcome by a sly beggar." Little John and George were quite willing to say nothing, but it is very likely that Will Scarlet thought the joke too good not to be told, for the tale got abroad, and a ballad was made about it, and sung for many a day of Robin Hood and his men, and the beggar with a meal pack. And that is the end of today's chapter. So apparently Robin Hood doesn't always win. Anyway, I hope you have a great rest of the day, that you enjoy the fine weather we're having again, that you stay well, and may God bless you. Bye.